And moving on to our first and next Fireside chat, we'll be talking with Vinod Khosla, the founder of Sun Microsoft Systems and founder of Khosla Ventures. Vinod received his education from the Indian Institute of Technology, a master's in bioengineering from Carnegie Mellon, and a master's in business from Stanford. With this experience, he founded Sun Microsystems in 1982 to build workstations for software engineers and pioneered open systems and commercial IRSC processors. In 2004, Vinod founded Khosla Ventures as a platform that focuses on both for-profit and social impact investments, allowing technology to act as a positive force multiplier and mentoring entrepreneurs. In this session, Vinod Khosla will be accompanied by John Lim, the partner and chief strategy officer at Pegasus Tech Ventures. John manages a global investment operations and M&A at Pegasus. He has been the lead partner in over 100 transactions at Pegasus, including SpaceX, Airbnb, DoorDash, SoFi, and 23andMe. He also has been managing the global operations of Startup World Cup since its inception and grown it from less than 20 regionals to over 50 today. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Vinod and John to the stage.
Good morning, everybody.
All right. Vinod, thanks so much for coming. It's great having you here, joining us today at Startup World Cup.
I'm always excited to talk to entrepreneurs.
That's great. We've got a lot of audience here that are from the global startups, so hope they have a lot to take away from the session. But let's start with, you've had a lot of passion into entrepreneurship since your early days, and you still are an entrepreneur. In your opinion, how has the entrepreneurial roller coaster changed? What's the same or what's different?
You know, so I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and I think role models are really important in entrepreneurship. And I remember reading about Intel starting up, started by a Hungarian immigrant who I got to tell this story to when I was 16. Wow. And I fell in love with the idea of starting my own tech company. I didn't know anybody in business, anybody in tech. I was the son of an Indian Army officer living in these cantonment areas in India, and fell in love with the idea and just pursued it relentlessly. And my first job was a startup. My second job was a startup. Right. My third job was a VC. And I've only had four jobs. So. The fourth was starting our own firm. So a history in a capsule. Entrepreneurship wasn't accepted. You know, today it is recognized as the source of all innovation. It wasn't accepted in 1980. And in fact, my first startup I did with two co-founders who said, hey, great, why don't you do the business plan and get funding while we stay at our job at Intel. Nobody wanted to take the risk. So it wasn't a risk-taking culture. So what's different? If I call a senior exec at a big company, they're almost always ready to talk about joining a startup. That wasn't the case. Everybody, your wife, your husband, your neighbors, right. Your parents discourage you from joining startups. It's much easier to get talent. In fact, what's lucky for all of you is the best, most creative people in the world now want to be in startups. And if you're a 20-year veteran of a big company, then you're going to essentially not be qualified for a real job in a startup. And they all aspire to do that.
Yeah, no, that's certainly the entire culture has changed very much, and I'm assuming it's going to continue to do so.
And you know, we have to understand why. I've been doing innovation only for 40 years. I can't think of a single large innovation that came from a source you'd expect it to come from. if you're talking about hard things like rocket launches, do you expect it to come from Boeing or Aerospace or Lockheed? No, it came from SpaceX and Rocket Lab. If you look at Uber, did it come up from Hertz or Avis? No, it came from a startup. Airbnb didn't come from Hyatt or
hotel chain,
Hilton, or we're in a Hilton. No matter where I look, and I've looked extensively in 40 years, I can't think of one single large innovation that came from an institution, a government program, a large entity. Frankly, the fate of society rests in the hands of entrepreneurs. That's why I love speaking to entrepreneurs, and that's why it energizes me so much. Because if we are going to change the world, and just yesterday I put out a dozen tweets around predictions I have for the next decade or two, like real startup ideas with names attached of the kinds of things people are doing. A dozen ideas. If we do those, and I'm very optimistic we can in the next 20, 25 years, we can completely change every assumption about society, every assumption. Even things like I predicted we can replace most cars in most cities. That's a pretty radical prediction, and I explain how, but it depends on entrepreneurs. That's my point. Large innovation comes from there. So, and I can't think of anything large or significant coming from an existing player. Now, Intel does a pretty good job of moving from X nanometer process to the next generation Y nanometer, but not radical, right? And so it really, societal progress depends on all of you, not anybody else. No research reports from McKinsey, no big Washington policy statements. It's individual entrepreneurs. So that's really exciting, and that's why it's so exciting to talk to all of you.
Yeah, and so good luck to all of you, so that we can all get a better future. So
you should cheer yourself. Yes.
Yeah. So you're a legend in Silicon Valley, both with great success as an entrepreneur and an investor. So how has your entrepreneurship experience changed how you make investment decisions? You've said VCs have to earn the right to give advice to entrepreneurs.
So I always tell the younger people in our firm, they haven't earned the right to advise an entrepreneur. Just because you join a VC firm doesn't qualify you to be on the board. And too much of this happens. People just put somebody on the board because they joined a VC firm, and suddenly they're giving advice to an entrepreneur without having done it themselves. Now, how can you advise an entrepreneur if you haven't built a large business yourself? And so a message to all of you, be really careful. And I like to say the hardest thing an entrepreneur does is decide whose advice to take on what topic. And you have to be very discriminating. If somebody has been a marketing person at IBM, they don't know the first thing about guerrilla marketing in a startup. So don't get caught up in titles or experience. Be very focused on what you're looking for and how you take advice and from whom on what topic. Most people ask their friends. That's a bad idea. They ask their parents sometimes if they're really young. They ask a title in a company. A title in a company is the same as a suit when it comes to the startup world. They have very little idea about startups. So that's a hard thing. Going back to your question, I'm sorry, I have long answers, but I'm passionate about talking to entrepreneurs. First, be careful. Your board members are mostly not qualified to help you. And what I find, if you Google 90% of VCs add no value, my name will pop up. It's sort of become a moniker. Because they don't. They've not built a company themselves. They haven't gone through the ups and downs. I did a presentation first in 1986, and it's called the Entrepreneurial Roller Coaster. It's still on our website, where the highs are high and the lows are low. And the press writes about the highs and how exciting it is. If you're a real entrepreneur, you know how hard it can be, how low the lows are. And unless a VC or a board member has real empathy for an entrepreneur, they're not going to be able to advise you well. Right. Other than the fact that they have short-term goals, and most entrepreneurs have long-term goals, that mismatch is a real source of bad advice.
Yeah, they're not involved in the daily operation.
But also this idea of they haven't been in your shoes. They don't have empathy for entrepreneurs. And so they can make grandiose statements which are general ChatGPT-like bullshit. So be very careful whose advice you take.
So on that note, can you actually give us a couple examples, if you don't mind, where even VCs have given bad advice to entrepreneurs?
I'm sorry?
Do you remember any instances where even VCs have given bad advice to entrepreneurs?
Well, I'll give you an example. A company in our portfolio, we invested about 3 years ago. We invested, now, you know, AI and ChatGPT weren't a thing. But I invested with the founder on the idea that we develop certain technology to really change the cost structure of delivering this service. We had we weren't on the board, there were 3 other VCs on the board, and they focused on revenue, and I kept saying, please don't focus on revenue. Focus on the cost structure so you can provide a competitive service. And they kept raising prices because they had no margin, but didn't invest in the core technology. Earlier this year, after spending a lot of money, tens of millions of dollars, the company was in trouble because there were negative margins. And they came to me and said, oh, boy, you were right. We're going to do this technology-based thing now. Would you participate? I said, sure, but only if you drop the unprofitable revenue. And they wouldn't do that. They didn't drop the unprofitable revenue because revenue looked good and it would help maybe get funding. And I said, you don't want to have the revenue, bad revenue. Instead, you should reduce your cost structure and your core function to what you need to develop a competitive advantage over the long term. Right. And they refused to do that. And then this all happened this year. And then 6, 8 months later, they came to me and said, oh, you're right. Can you lead this financing, which I was willing to, and we will cut the burn rate to what you want and focus on the core technology. And by the time I looked at it, all the good technical people were gone. They had left because they had not paid any attention. The founder was gone. And so this is a good example of VCs destroying a company. I could give you 100 examples like this. Wow. We don't have enough time to talk about all my examples.
Hope we can, but...
But this is a very precise, just happened, a really, really promising area, and I'd invest in it again today because it was a promising area. The market was right. The customers were responding, but the cost structure wasn't set up to be right, and instead of thinking, and this is really important lesson for all entrepreneurs. Think about what your competitive advantage is, and the reason to get revenue early is not to get revenue, but to learn about the market. So you can develop technologies to have a competitive advantage in the market so why you get revenue at each stage, or customers, or freemium, or whatever, it's really important to understand that. In AI, it might be data collection. But you have to be clear why you're chasing each function that you're chasing.
Got it. No, really appreciate that insightful advice there. So I wanted to focus a little bit more on the investor side, your investment experience. So based on your experience, what differentiates entrepreneurs that you think has higher chance of success versus the ones that won't?
So let me answer a different question first, and then I'll answer that question. First, in the 40 years I've been doing venture capital, I've never once called myself a venture capitalist and won't now. I always say I'm a venture assistant helping entrepreneurs build companies. Because I think that's what entrepreneurs should look for, is people who've gone through enough experiences, gone through building enough very large companies. Now, how do you build a multi-billion-dollar company is a non-trivial thing. Yeah. And the number of startups that make it there. So you want the right advice. So that'd be my first thing. What was your original question?
Yeah, so what differentiates the entrepreneurs that you think has high chance of success versus?
So, you know, when I look at entrepreneurs, what differentiates one I'm willing to back? It's an odd mix. You want entrepreneurs with strong opinions. I don't necessarily need an entrepreneur that's easy to work with, because you want people with strong opinions. But at the same time, and a great example is Max Levchin or Patrick Collison, two companies we are very fortunate to invest very early in. Yeah. Very strong, clear opinions. But they'll sit down with anybody and take their input, and then decide if that input turns into advice or not. So great entrepreneurs have very clear visions, are opinionated, almost obstinate and persistent. But they take a lot of input. They're very selective about synthesizing it. And one of the best ways to tell a great entrepreneur is their learning rate. How fast are they learning? You know, here some engineer starts a company A, another engineer starts company B. Some will stay an engineer or stay opinionated and not listen, and others will learn rapidly. By the way, if an entrepreneur takes my advice all the time, I often give wrong advice to entrepreneurs to test whether they take it. If they adapt it without thinking, it's a bad entrepreneur, to your question. Right? I want to challenge them. I don't want to tell them what to do. Right? I want them to think about the issues. So I often take stances I don't believe in to see how an entrepreneur handles them.
Just to get them to thinking.
Yeah. But you want entrepreneurs that think about their input, are selective, synthesized into their vision with which they can lead the company. Right. So learning rate is maybe the rate at which they learn new things, especially outside their area. You know, if you're an engineer, what do you learn about customers or marketing or other things? Those kinds of things, I think, are really what make great entrepreneurs, along with persistence. And along with, I don't care when the lows are low, in my old paradigm. Yep. I'm going to power through it. I have religion about what I'm doing. Yeah, no. That's a great entrepreneur. People who take the highs are high and accept the bullshit the press is writing, that's really dangerous for an entrepreneur.
I see. Well, actually, before you answered this question, you went into the venture assistance business. You don't call yourself investor, you don't call yourself venture capitalist. So can you give us a little bit more about how you help portfolio companies, how you spend time with portfolio companies?
Well, without going into details, I spent an hour, I do periodic updates with our companies, then I challenge them. I spent an hour, even with a mature company like a firm last night. Wow. And I said, so how are you thinking about X or Y? And I said, Max, invert that completely and use this perspective. Is it useful to him? I don't know. I'll find out. But challenging them to think differently. I had another discussion with another entrepreneur in the robotics field yesterday. I do a lot of this meeting with our portfolio companies and trying to help them think about the things they are missing. As I said, I worry about your pricing. So next meeting we have in January, can you look at various market segments and what your goals are? In market A, revenue is okay. In market B, this other thing. And this third thing is collecting data. The pricing strategy for each of those is radically different. So I went through a pricing discussion with them. And most entrepreneurs really don't do a great job of pricing. I spend an incredible amount of time recruiting. I probably had 3 interviews yesterday with candidates for our companies.
That's amazing.
Huh?
That's amazing you're spending that much time.
If I look at my calendar for 2023, the single largest chunk of my time is probably interviewing candidates for our portfolio companies.
Wow.
And I'm very watchful to not say this person. So a candidate in robotics, a company in robotics, was looking only at robotics people. I said, what you're not doing, this is the wrong way. You're narrowing your set of candidates dramatically. Think about the characteristics. In this particular case, it was building a sales program. There aren't a lot of robotics companies that have built great sales programs. So I said, look outside of that for a great leader.
You want to bring in experience.
Yeah.
Right.
And by the way, generally, people who've been in an area a long time are pretty bad hires for startups in that area. So in healthcare, for example, I try not hire people from healthcare to lead a healthcare company. Why? Because they have the wrong instincts. They extrapolate the past, what they've done before, instead of inventing the new future you want. If you're trying to disrupt the future, instincts about the past are usually wrong, unless you have a great founder leader whose clarity of vision lets them ignore that advice and then learn from somebody with experience. So a good model is a founder who doesn't know the area. All the examples I gave you were from people who had never been in the area, whether it's Uber or Airbnb or SpaceX or Rocket Lab or Google. Look at Google, YouTube, Netflix, Twitter, Facebook. These are media companies that didn't even know they were media companies. And anybody from media who tried to build one of these kinds of new generation media companies failed. I had many conversations with Rupert Murdoch in the early 2000s. He was trying to be in this new media space, and they bought MySpace. It should have been Facebook. But traditional instincts killed MySpace. When Time Warner bought AOL, it killed AOL and Time Warner. I could give you examples where hiring is such a nuanced thing. It's a critical part of venture assistance. What I think I do for companies is help them think about what they need in hiring. And it's the single biggest chunk of my time.
No, that's
the next is challenging entrepreneurs to think about things they're not thinking about.
I think this is a great example of a value-add investor. And as Pegasus, we're also very much focused into investing in value-add because we connect the portfolio companies with our corporate investors. We're also organizing events like the Startup World Cup, creating opportunities for networking, partnership opportunities, funding
opportunities. By the way, you mentioned networking and partnerships. Entrepreneurs learn more talking to each other than from people on the board who've never built a company, right? Because they've dealt with these real problems. If you bring in this experienced guy, my best performers will get all up. Trade-offs are hard. I hate it, and I don't go to board meetings anymore much. When somebody says, never built a company, and says, focus. Focus is a really bad term that board members ask entrepreneurs to do. And I'm not suggesting lack of focus, but it's a nuanced approach. Or things like higher experience, or there's a series of these, what I call business platitudes, that board members advise because it's supposed to be that way. And they don't apply to every entrepreneur. In fact, the answer for each entrepreneur is different. There's not one answer.
Right. There's no one right textbook.
If you haven't found product market fit, focus is a bad idea. If you have, focus is a good idea.
Right.
Right? So when, what, who to hire, what's sort of your critical needs, those are very nuanced things around building a company. Building a company is really hard, as most of you know. And you need the best advice, not platitudes.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, even with the right advice, it'll still be difficult. You'll still face challenges. But I want to talk a little bit about one of your probably hottest portfolio companies over the past year. Let's do a quick poll, actually. How many of you have heard of OpenAI? or ChatGPT? Yeah.
If you haven't, you shouldn't be here.
No, so you were an early investor in OpenAI as the company was transitioning from a nonprofit to like a private enterprise. Yeah. Just curious, what made you invest into OpenAI? Did you even know that it's going to have this much of a global impact?
Look, it was January of 2012, long story behind that. I first wrote a blog. My first blog was called Do We Need Doctors? It was the first week of January 2012 in TechCrunch when it was still a thing. The second blog was Do We Need Teachers? And I postulated then that AI would do these functions and do them much better than humans do them. So I'd had that thesis. I did my first deep learning startup, which didn't work in 2013 or so. Mm-hmm. It was around images, didn't work, and it was an acqui-hire. But I so believed in the future AI could bring. In fact, I wrote a 110-page document on how you transition medicine from the art of medicine to the science of medicine. And it happened because, and the reason I wrote the blog was I was on a ski vacation for 2 weeks and tore my ACL the day before Christmas.
Oh, no.
So I had to stay in bed with nothing to do. And I took my MRI to 3 different doctors, and they prescribed 3 different things. Oh. And these are the best, most renowned names. And I said, so the treatment I get depends on the doctor I get, not the ACL tear I have. You know, it is true of most medicine. So I wrote a 120-page document, which is public, on how to where medicine is and how we need to transition it. Of course, I had a lot of time. So I've had this long belief in AI. So in 2018, when Sam called me, I said, I don't know when what capability will determine, but over the next decade, I'm pretty sure, and if we have time, I'll come back and give you a similar analogy. Mm-hmm. I am pretty sure AI will be important. Right. And, you know, by the way, nobody believed this in 2018. It was around this time in 2018 that we made this decision. Investment took a few more months to close and all that, especially since it was an unusual structure. But I didn't focus on the mechanisms, the organization, I just said, massive market. If it's a massive market, this is a great team. There was only really a Google team, a Baidu team, and an OpenAI team. I'm placing my bets here, and we're going to bet heavily. By the way, as vague as the opportunity was, and it was almost impossible to diligence, I made the largest bet by a factor of 2 of any investment I've made initial investment I've made in 40 years. by a factor of 2. We put in 50 million, which we'd never done before in my entire history, whether at Kleiner or at Khosla Ventures, because I had conviction. And we've stayed with that conviction. But I'll give you another example of this. Because, in 1996, we invested in Juniper, TCP/IP. In 1996, every major telco in the United States believed they would never adapt TCP/IP for the public internet. ATM was the technology they were going to use. I'd adapted TCP/IP at Sun in 1982, and I could see it growing. But the early parts of an exponential are flat. So when 1996 came, said, time to build a router. I talked to the Cisco CTO, Ed Kozel, who will probably not remember this, and he said Cisco will never build a router above OC12, which is my home service today. Actually, my home service is a little better than that. Cisco will never build a router. I said, great. It's the only thing that will scale with the internet. I believe in the internet. So we'll make this investment, even though every single customer is saying no. But I was sure we were at the knee of the exponential curve. Having watched it from 1982, we were at the knee, and I had conviction in my belief around that. And we invested, and I think $3 or $4 million initial investment turned into $7 billion. Wow. A 2,500x return for Kleiner. Why? Because we had conviction. And we are the only ones with that conviction. Not everybody was investing. Right. OpenAI is the same issue. It was the year 2000, in an interview with the New York Times, so it's on the record, I said, sometime in my lifetime, AI will be important enough, and I'd had this conviction, that we will have to redefine, this was the exact phrase I used in the New York Times interview, we will have to redefine what it means to be human. I didn't make specific predictions. Then in 2012, I wrote these blogs. But I could see the same exponential of TCP/IP when it was flat, when you could make a prediction that nobody else believed, and see the knee of the curve. And AI was the same thing. So in 2018, my hunches from 2000 and 2012 were like, now's the time to place a big bet. And so we placed a big bet. And that was 5 years ago, before anybody believed in this, or before it was clear when AI would have this knee-of-the-curve moment. By the way, it's because of that, just yesterday, I made a dozen tweets around predictions, radical predictions, like we will replace most cars in most cities in the next 20, 25 years. Like we will have 1 billion bipedal robots in the next 20 years or 25 years. By the way, that would be an industry larger than the auto industry, created from zero in the next decade or two. That's pretty significant, if I'm right, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, that we will create 1 billion programmers. There's only 7 billion people on the on the planet, so everyone will be writing code, but they'll be writing it in natural language, not in Python or Java or one of those. So I have a dozen of these, and including all the reasons they may not happen, because there are reasons it may not happen. But you sort of have to have a belief system that you have conviction around, and it's most valuable. Today, it's not valuable to believe AI will be big. Right? Everybody's doing it. Right. But 5 years ago, it was really valuable to place large bets on. And the next set of bets are around these tweets that we are placing. They're not general predictions. They're actionable, and I sort of associate a bet we are placing. One of my predictions is we'll replace all coal and natural gas plants in the next 25 years. That's a pretty radical prediction. I don't know of an expert who believes me. But I haven't argued, debated this with anybody who's been able to prove me wrong, any expert. I predicted that corn, we will have an alternative protein to corn and soy in the next decade for human consumption. Those are pretty large shifts in society. So go enjoy those.
No, please check out the 12 predictions. I think it'll be very interesting. We're at time actually, but I have one last quick question I want to ask for the entrepreneurs out here. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that want to get funding from investors like yourself. So how should a startup approach a VC or an investor to secure that first meeting? Can you give us a quick answer?
Yeah, it's not hard. It's way easier than all of you think. My email is vk@Khosla Ventures.
You guys all writing it down? Yeah?
I respond to all my emails. Sometimes they get backed up, so it may take a couple of weeks. I scan almost everything I get myself for a short period. So be crisp, and then I assign it to the right person within Khosla Ventures. So every single email gets attention, and I may pass it to somebody and say, hey, Alice, this looks kooky, probably a pass, or this looks exciting, dig in. So I'll do that quick early judgment myself, but I do pay attention, and I give out my email pretty freely.
You guys all wrote it down,
Look,
right?
here's the thing that all of you don't realize. I'm 68. There's not a lot of people in my age cohort who are doing interesting things.
Well,
I don't want to be ageist, but they're all thinking about golf or sailing or a Florida retirement community. I learn a lot from all of you. To stay relevant to, entrepreneurs, whether they're in their 40s or 20s or 16, I always want to hear, and I use your email to judge how thoughtful you are. If you're thoughtful, I will meet with everybody, whether they have a plan or not. I just got an email from India from some guy working on AI by himself. And he had the worst possible business plan, right? But he had interesting technological ideas. And so I called one of my people. I said, meet with them, but in fact, 3 of you should meet with them. And don't judge their business plan, judge the person and their technical approach and see if it's real. And then help him formulate the business plan, the market to go after. Right? And so I do pay attention. Sorry we are running late. Thank you. I talk too much.
No.
But I'm passionate about it.
It's been a great pleasure talking with you. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much. That was so insightful and inspiring. Please stay on the stage for some gifts of our appreciation. Who was motivated by that? Anybody inspired? Woo! I know I was. Thank you so much for sharing those valuable insights with us. We really appreciate it. I got this feeling inside my bones. It goes electric. Awesome. As we are transitioning, we will be transitioning into the next phase of the event.